Hi, I'm Susan from Sunrise Quilt Studio. Today I'm quilting the Snowball Quilt, and I'm using one of the designs that I drew out on paper. This is the center of the block here, and I am doing the Greek key type echo in the center of this block. Now these blocks are alternate patterns as far as the fabrics. The fabrics are alternate from one block to the next. The centers in one will be a muslin, and then the block next to it will be a pattern fabric. But you can see this Greek key design goes really fast, and I didn't use a template to help me with the curves. I just freehanded that around the quilt. Now on the circles, I use the petal that alternates with that bell shape, and I think that turned out really well. I didn't worry about marking the center of each one of those quarter sections. I just eyeballed that and made the bell to center around that section. This is another pattern that goes really fast, and you can do more to this pattern. You could echo within each one of those petals and even in that bell if you wanted to, and put more quilting in there. Now on this center, this is another muslin center of the block, and I'm doing the Greek key design, and you'll notice that pucker in that lower corner there. That was already stitched in that block, and as I've mentioned previously on vintage tops, I don't work real hard to take those puckers out because that's just an integral part of the quilt, and they've been in there so long that it is really hard to get all of those out. Now that one was small and I probably could have worked at it, but doing these curves is a little bit difficult for me using one hand, and I would have had to have used one hand to hold that fabric down and then the other hand to guide the machine and quilt over it, and getting a smooth curve at the same time would have been pretty difficult. So I chose to just let that little pleat stay in there and just not worry about it. Now on this section, I'm doing the same thing with that pattern in the circles. The machine is on stitch regulated mode, and I'm in, I think, 11 stitches per inch on this quilt. Now one of the things that I normally do on quilts is I will stabilize them before I do any of the quilting within the blocks, and that means stitching in the ditch around the blocks and the borders. Now this quilt doesn't have any borders, and I didn't want to stitch around the block because that would put stitching where I didn't want it. So what I did instead is I just quilted this quilt from the top to the bottom without stabilizing it. And you will see here when I get finished with this little section here, I quilt the center of that block, and then I'm going to do the circle that's to the lower right of that. And what I'll do first is I'll grab that circle template there, and I will stitch in the ditch around the circle, and then I'll do the quilting within the circle. This quilt isn't very large. It's about 65 by 72 if I remember correctly, and it did stay pretty square for me. I didn't have any trouble with that. But here I am with the machine, and I'm going to grab that template and then stitch around in the ditch around the circle sections of those blocks. And this template isn't the exact size that I need. It's a little bit larger, but what I'm going to do is just adjust that template as I go so that I can keep the needle in the ditch of the seams there. And you can see even that goes pretty quickly. So this is a really good design to use on a customer quilt, and you can do this design on any quilt with circles in it. It doesn't have to have the divided circles like this quilt does. It could just be a solid fabric circle without being quartered like this one is. You would just have to mark in some registration marks to help guide you to get everything evenly spaced. And then from that circle I just go into the center of the next block and do the Greek key quilting in there. and that all goes pretty quickly. I think this is the fastest quilt that I have done in quite a while, but I did have to restrain myself from adding extra quilting in it. I really didn't want a lot of dense quilting in this quilt. This was one that I felt didn't need the dense quilting that I have gotten used to doing on most quilts. So that's all done, and then I'll go over to the circle and do the same thing with the template. Now this is one that you wouldn't have to use your stitch regulator on. You could just do this in manual mode, and it would still go quickly. It would probably go a little bit faster than what this did. But when I'm working with a plastic template, an acrylic template like this, I like to use the stitch regulator so that I can take my time and really make sure that that quilting is going in the ditch. And that would mean that after I got that section done, I'd have to switch to manual mode, and just that switching back and forth between manual and stitch regulated mode would take up all the extra time that I would be saving by doing part of it in manual mode. So I didn't feel like that was worth it. So here's a photo of the completed quilt. The binding is a reproduction 1930s fabric, and you can see the quilting there. I think that turned out pretty well. I'm pretty happy with that. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if so, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and thanks for watching.